So we had a conversation not too long, but here we are at PorcFest, and I thought it would make sense to essentially continue this conversation and continue to dig a little bit deeper. And you and I just participated in this really fun process of soapbox ranting here at PorcFest. And your rant in particular caught my attention, and I've heard you talk about some of these things before, but you haven't talked about it on the show, and it opens up a whole range of conversation about the capture of our most important institutions. And I want to start with just talking about the New York Times. You gave an introduction to RFK Jr. When he spoke here, I guess 2 days ago now, right?
Yeah, I guess 2 days ago.
And you told you slagged on the New York Times a little bit, and the crowd went bananas.
Yeah, that's red meat, right?
Yeah. But I think your critique is more than red meat. It's a revelation, because I've known you long enough to know that you used to cherish the New York Times.
I always have. I always have, and not because I agreed with the politics, but you said something a couple of days ago that really struck me, and I forget exactly how you put it, but I think you said something like, we used to believe that the game was fair, and then we find out that it's rigged, something along those lines. So I was this way about the New York Times. I thought it was, as we say, liberal, or left liberal, sort of a New York progressive thing. But there's a core of earnest desire to tell the truth and to cover everything, because they had a responsibility to America and to the truth. And as long as I look back at the New York Times, yes, they've made mistakes. Yes, they got bamboozled by the reporter in the Ukraine and so on, and there's been errors along the way. But I always believed that there was an earnest desire there to at least reflect the wholeness of the reality of America as best they could. But on that day, February 27th, it became very different. And that was when Michael Barbaro, who's the daily host of their podcast, which had, I think in those days, even as high as 2 or 3 million listeners. But it was that day that it was announced, essentially, that you should panic and we should shut down the country for a killer virus that's going to kill 1 in 6 of your friends. Now, we need to understand the implications of the fact that a number of features of this. One, that the New York Times has chosen. Why did the national security state choose the New York Times and Michael Barbaro and Donald G. McNeil, their lead virus reporter, to be the ones to announce this? Now, you could say, well, they didn't choose it. It was just editorial opinion. I don't believe that. Because that day, they repudiated 100 years of history. We have always faced pandemics in this country, and we've always understood that public health required one thing above all else, which was public calm. So you can go back and look. What did they say about 2009 H1N1? They said, calm down, it's fine. What did they say about SARS-CoV-1 in 2003? They said, these things are self-limiting. It's going to be okay. And they said the same thing about 1968 and 69, the same thing in 1957, 58. We'll figure out the therapeutics. For that matter, they called out the 1929 parrot flu and said, people are going crazy. You need to calm down. This is not consistent with public health. But on that day of February 27th, they chose an alternative route, which was they chose to stoke public panic. And I wrote Michael after this. I said, who are you working for, buddy? Why did you do this? Who came to you? Who got to you? Who came to your office and told you to do this? This is a disaster. You're going to destroy public health in this country with this. And they did. They did. The next day, they ran Donald G. McNeil's article called "To Take on the Coronavirus, You Have to Go Medieval on It." He advocated shutting down all travel, restrictions between the states, closing down all institutions, and so on. He really did prepare the way for the calamity that we face today.
It's fascinating that they use that phrase medieval, because it is literally a medieval strategy, hiding in your cave until this mysterious thing that we don't know anything about, the plague.
Pre-scientific.
Yeah, pre-scientific.
Yeah.
I also discovered at some point, I can't pinpoint it like you have, but for my entire career, I've understood that most what we used to call mainstream media was hostile to my libertarian values.
Sure.
But I didn't ever assume that they were essentially on the payroll. And I maybe I shouldn't say that way, but they're explicit apparatchiks for the biosecurity state now. And those talking points came from somewhere. We'll probably never know where. But the orchestration of it, the propaganda preciseness of it, is something that I think we're still trying to wrap our head around. Like, what?
Yeah.
How deep does this problem? How deep is the cancer?
You know, those days, February 24th, 25th, 26th, those are the same days that Fauci flipped from having been, on the side of this is going to be a severe flu. We don't need a vaccination. That's what he said. For February 10th. And he himself changed his mind, not based on the evidence, but based on the new agenda, really, essentially. And so he began to front for the national security state himself. And now, just to be clear, when I say front for the national security state, this is not a conspiracy theory, as they say, because 2 weeks later, on March 13th, the Department of Health and Human Services released, on the same day that the emergency declaration was issued, a confidential document that had an org chart in it. Who is going to be in charge of the pandemic response? And your listeners will be surprised to learn that at the top of the org chart was not the CDC and not NIH, so not Fauci, and certainly not Redfield, who was heading the CDC at the time. The top of the org chart was the National Security Council.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is why, I definitely want to talk about RFK Jr. Because the reason I found his talk fascinating was that he is pulling some pieces into a puzzle that I've already been filling out quite independently of him. I haven't read his book. I know you have.
Yeah.
I hadn't sat
It's a treasure
down.
trove,
I hadn't sat down and listened to him speak about the biosecurity state and the collusion between the censors at the FBI and CIA and the cover-up of the real story of COVID. But I first heard, I was suspicious and trying to figure out, because as late as 2021, it still didn't make sense to me. There's something more going on. Why the cover-up? Why the unity of these extraordinarily authoritarian approaches
Around the world or around the country?
Both.
Yeah.
But I was thinking more about the United States, because I understand. I could easily understand why China would do what they did. Well, of course they would. They're authoritarians. They don't care about people.
Right.
It's all a numbers game with them. And if they destroy half their population doing this experiment,
you expect them to go medieval.
Yeah, that's what authoritarians, and particularly if communism is in your name, there's a history here where they do that. But I didn't expect it from America. And it wasn't until a conversation that I had with Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, right? He's the one that pointed out to me that this massive expansion in Fauci's power and the weaponization of NIAID within NIH and all of these biosecurity experiments were a response to 9/11, perhaps preceding even 9/11. These were plans that they had before that.
Yeah.
And then things started to make sense, and you start peeling back the onion, and you realize this is a wild national security experiment that reminds me of, it always reminds me of Stranger Things. I don't know if you've seen the series.
Yeah, I've not. So not since, I saw it in the before times, as they say.
Yeah.
I've not seen it backwards. Everything, by the way, looks differently to me. Songs are different.
Yeah.
Symphonies sound different. TV shows of the past look different. Movies that I've seen, I watch again. I see now everything through this coup d'etat, essentially, that happened on March 13th, 2020. Yeah.
If you're watching this show, you're probably wondering, is there a way I can support liberty and improve my life at the same time? Well, there is. Pack Crest Botanicals is a libertarian-owned company that makes botanical CBD products. I started using CBD oil to help me when I'm trying to sleep, and my 3 annoying cats won't leave me alone. Now I can just ignore them for a solid 8 hours and wake up feeling great. Not only are they run by our friends in the Liberty Movement,
Packed Crest Botanicals also uses high-quality organic ingredients in everything they make. They sell tinctures, edibles, topicals, and botanical vapes. CBD oil can help with pain, insomnia, inflammation, anxiety, stress, arthritis, and more. Use discount code FREETHEPEOPLE to save 25% of your order. And if you select Free the People as your charitable organization at checkout, a portion of your purchase will be donated to us to help fight for freedom.
It's worth watching again, and my fear is that science fiction almost always is predictive of the future, and particularly these dystopian science fictions. But remember the premise, particularly in the first season, we don't know how Stranger Things ends, but we know that the national security state was doing a wild experiment. I won't spoil it for people.
Well,
who haven't watched
I
it.
didn't remember that.
Yeah.
So
it starts off, they're drilling a hole in the middle of the earth because they want to find this very dangerous weapon to use against the Soviets.
Oh.
And in the process of experimenting, trying to find a weapon to destroy the bad guys, they unleash hell on earth.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this just sound. And I didn't watch
amazing.
it. I didn't watch it until after lockdowns, and I'm like, I've seen this story in real life.
Wow, that's amazing. Another. And again, I'm watching everything all over again. I mean, this was a real turning point in my life, and really, I would say in the history of civilization. So everything does look different. I recently watched for the first time Downton Abbey, and I saw that whole thing in light of the lockdowns. I mean, you wouldn't think so. I wrote about it. The article went viral, surprisingly, but everything looks different to us. I tell you what's a very interesting movie you may or may not have seen called Contagion.
Yes.
Okay.
But I haven't seen it since.
So after lockdowns, I'm looking for things to watch. And so I thought, well, let's watch Contagion. And I watched it, and it was just incredible. I mean, it was COVID. Or what they said COVID was, complete with the blogger with the ivermectin and the hydroxychloroquine, that was making money and off of it, and then the CDC was running around talking on phones, contract tracing everybody and warning, you got in contact with the virus, and the guy's like, oh no, that's very bad, and then he crashed, and then I thought, well, it's just uncanny. Are we? Did everybody watch this movie? And so now we're all just doing what the movie's playing our role that the movie says we're supposed to play? Well, it turns out some of the people that were involved in the COVID response were in fact responsible for making that movie.
Yeah.
So that movie itself was a national security state production.
Establishing the narrative.
Yeah. So, and when, I don't remember that movie was made, but a long time ago, right? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
But... So these
at least a decade, maybe even 20 years ago.
So I'm not sure how you imagine these things, Matt. But what I'm trying to think about, the way I've begun to think about it, is you have this major administrative apparatus, this beast out there that is, which we call the state, which you and I have been fighting for most of our lives, and I'm imagining that there's a card file, and you can reach into the card file. And this card file has been around for, let's say, 1,000 years. And in the card file is a series of things you can do to panic the public. Oh, no, everybody's stopping believing in transubstantiation. We need to warn everybody that those who are not believing in transubstantiation are going to go to hell. Oh, here's one with the devil. We need to convince everybody the devil's on loose. And here's one with witchcraft on it. And here's one with communism on it. And here's one with the Mormons on it, and so on. You can go through the list. And but one of those cards is infectious disease. Very effective.
Yeah.
Panic everybody about their own mortality, lie about everything. But it's so puzzling, though, Matt, because there's so many pieces that came together. In fact, I knew some friends of mine in the UK that were against lockdowns in the early days, and they changed their minds. They said, well, the problem with being against the lockdowns is that you have to believe that there's too many things coming together at once. Bad science. Bad PCR tests, death misclassification in the hospital, a panicked population suddenly kicking the bucket out of fear. Ventilators delivered to all the hospitals designed to stop people from breathing outside so that they wouldn't spread COVID, and then they died. There's just too many. It's all too perfect. Your scenario is too perfect. It can't. Not all those pieces could possibly fit together in this grand scheme. And so these people decided that they were going to accept the conventional wisdom because they thought, you see what I mean, that they thought the contrary scenario was in a sense too perfect.
Yeah.
But in fact, if you did have 15 years to plan what looked like a major disaster for humanity, and then a gigantic expansion of the state complete with censorship and a takeover of social media and technology and the media and everything, you would do all those things. And if you had 15 years to do it, you would practice it, you would game it in advance, and of course when you look back, it turns out that's exactly what they did. They've been gaming infectious disease outbreaks for the better part of 15, 20 years.
You're the one that turned me on to this academic journal article that Fauci co-wrote with one of his colleagues at, I think, NIAID, not just NIH. And there's that shocking paragraph at the end of that article, and it's about the next pandemic. But he lays out this
vision for humanity.
Yeah, I would say a medieval vision for humanity.
This is August 2020.
Yeah.
So you have to think about the timing of this. We locked down in March. The whole world's falling apart. We pretended to let everybody have freedom for a few minutes before to riot for BLM, and then we had to lock down again. And it was in August that article came out. That article imagines. First of all, the whole thing is wrong. What it does is it theorizes that the reason for infectious disease is civilization.
Yeah.
You remember? So I think he says something like 25,000 years ago we started moving around, and that released terrible pathogens.
Right.
So, I mean,
he's apparently unaware of the plague.
Well, and in fact, if you look at the article, they're still kvetching about cholera. I'm sorry, we solved cholera by cleaning up the water supply. What are these people talking about?
Yeah.
So they're crazy people. And at the end, they imagine that they're going to as Fauci and his co-author, who also works for NIH, they imagine the dismantling of cities, the end of sporting events, the end of large concerts, the end of travel, the end of pet ownership. Where they can't stand pets. They think they spread disease. A dramatic change in our diet, and then to farming. So it's absolutely creepy. This came out in August of 2020 in a public journal. I think the journal is called Cell.
Yeah.
So why, and it got almost no attention whatsoever.
An important journal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Signed by Anthony Fauci, laying out his vision of what the future should be.
Yeah. No one paid attention.
Yeah.
It reminded me that the moment that you in one of your articles, you flagged that passage, I went back and reread Hayek's Counter-Revolution of Science.
Oh.
And it reminded me vaguely, I hadn't read it since I was a very young guy, it reminded me of the original conception of socialism, which was a form of radical scientism where you were going to replace the chaos of the market with engineers and technocrats and the very smartest people. You're going to give them the
this
power.
This is before Marx?
Yeah.
The 18...
It's pre-Marx, yeah.
18...
It's what's his name? Saint-Simon.
Saint-Simon.
Who is credited as the founding father of socialism. One of his acolytes used the word long before Marx did.
Uh-huh.
And Marx was highly critical of this because Saint-Simon was more utopian. He assumed that we could trust the smartest amongst us, the scientists, to reorganize and redesign society in a rational way.
Uh-huh.
And Marx came along later and said, no, it's got to be violent. We're going to have to kill some people to get this done.
Yeah, to get the Hegelian course of history on the right track and all that gibberish, right?
But when we half jokingly talk about Faucism, Hayek would have called it scientism, and not just this elite belief that you could reorganize economic activity. But science itself needs to be redesigned from the top down, which is utterly, as you and I know, utterly unscientific.
Yeah. Do you recommend that we go back and read Counter-Revolution of Science?
I think it explains everything.
Wow.
Not just what happened, but where we're going. Because Socialism is, I think socialism is dead, and it's being replaced with this technocratic authoritarianism.
Right.
And the word socialism, except for a few members of Congress, is a destroyed term.
Yeah.
But the science, the faith in the science, even
Rule
this
by science.
I think this was the Achilles heel for some of our libertarian friends.
Yeah, I agree.
A blind faith in science, not appreciating that sciences have been hijacked by the state.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about using CBD oil? You haven't? Well, think about it now. Are you thinking about it? Good, because now there's a way to support freedom and improve your life at the same time. Packrest Botanicals is a libertarian-owned company that makes a wide variety of botanical CBD products. I use CBD oil to soothe the sore muscles I get from constantly fighting the man here in Washington, D.C. It's a tough job. Somebody's got to do it. Packrest Botanicals uses high-quality organic ingredients in everything they make. And as libertarians, you won't have to worry about them hurting people or taking their stuff. They sell tinctures, edibles, topicals, and botanical vapes. CBD oil can help with pain, insomnia, inflammation, anxiety, stress, arthritis, and more. Use the discount code FREETHEPEOPLE to save 25% of your order, and if you select Free the People as your charitable organization at checkout, a portion of your purchase will be donated to help us keep fighting for freedom.
There's another feature of this that's very interesting. It has to do with the government capture of industry.
Yeah.
So not just science, but industry too, which RFK calls corporatism. Of course, that's sort of the polite term for fascism. But that itself
the actual meaning of fascism.
Yeah. But that itself has a very long history, tracing all the way back to the 1820s, about which I've written a book. But I was unaware to the extent to which that this was unfolding, over the last, say, 15 or 20 years. And I didn't see it. I wasn't aware of it. And then suddenly you're presented with the full reality. Oh, it turns out that big tech is entirely captured by the national security state. Oh, media is itself just an organ of opinion for the national security state, and that the scientific journals and, the whole of industry, it's just this creeping statism to the point that, because when I was young, you could count on business being in favor of, the Chamber of Commerce and free enterprise and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
You can count on that if it's a small business now, more or less, I think. Not always, but sometimes, a lot of times.
Well, at least the ones that are left, because there was, of course, a grand centralization.
Yeah, consolidation of industry.
Business, yeah.
And that, again, this is just, it was so brutal. To declare some businesses unessential, and then the ones that were essential were just the big businesses. They're the ones that thrived and consolidated industry. And you can look at the charts. Where are the labor resources? Where's the capital resources? It all just got centralized during lockdowns. And for a long time, I just thought, well, this was just a mistake, But at this point, I just don't believe that anymore.
Yeah. Let's unpack this word. I don't like using the word fascism unless I can explain
I know.
the history of it.
That's why I actually prefer corporatism. At least it's new and fresh.
Yeah. But obviously there's this great quote by Orwell that the word fascism is now used so often as basically a way to call somebody an asshole.
Yeah.
He doesn't use the word asshole, but that's what he's saying, that it has no meaning. But obviously in economics, fascism is government control of the means of production. Not ownership, but control.
Exactly. So your industries remain privately owned, but the control is transferred to elite power structures that are outside of them. And industry often welcomes this, That's the thing. They're going for that. Just the other day, Ford took a, $8.6 billion loan from the government to develop their fleet of electric cars. Okay, so they're a pretty levered up company. They've been losing a lot of money. They welcome a bailout of sorts, but in exchange for which, they're going to thrive. But in exchange for which, they have to give up control of the design and manufacture of their own product.
they'll be captured, but they won't have to deal with competitors, upstarts with
There
better
you go.
technologies and better ideas.
Yeah.
What is your sense? I mean, I think the ultimate example of this kind of collusion between government and business is the production and mandating of certain vaccines. Not the
Right.
requirement was not that you get vaccinated. The requirement was, here's the ones that we want you to take.
Yeah. They've been trying to develop mRNA technology for the better part of 20 years, and this is their chance to unleash it on the population. Now, I had been distracted from the centrality of the pharmaceutical industry in the COVID response because, no, I just didn't see it. A lot of my friends were very aware from the very first time that there was an encouragement of public panic. It's like, oh, I get it. So we just lose up all our liberty. Then they manufacture the antidote, and they force us to get it. And the pharma becomes rich. Is that what's going on here? Now, if you had told me that in March or April, I wouldn't have believed you. Now, I have to be clear on this. Like, I knew from the very beginning that you could never have an effective vaccine for this virus. You can effectively vaccinate against really stable pathogens like polio and smallpox, right? Those work because those aren't constantly mutating. But there are other pathogens that you have many different changes of clothes. You know, it's like a large wardrobe. You know, evening wear, summer, spring. You know, they're changing all the time. Those you can't manufacture vaccines against. They've had a hell of a time with the flu vaccine. It's not really a vaccine. It's a kind of therapeutic. It's a hit and miss. And that's why most people just don't bother with it. And that's probably right. But I knew there could never be a vaccine. So, but here's what happened to me. When they announced the vaccine, I thought, well, this is ridiculous. We're not going to vaccinate our way out of this pandemic. I knew that for sure. I figured it was just sort of profiteering. And also, there was a problem with lockdowns that there was never an end game. You know, we're locked down, and then what? It was not clear.
3 more weeks.
Yeah, just wait 2 weeks.
Just Easter.
Yeah, but there was no way to stop it. You know, there was no way to declare victory or whatever because I think Trump believed he was actually going to stop it from spreading. I mean, he was very confused. But so I thought the vaccine was just the thing that we would pretend to release, and then finally we could get out of lockdowns, get our freedom back, but that we would reject the vaccine. So the idea that it would be mandated, you know, was beyond belief. But then it just got worse and worse and worse. And so it looks for all the world as if the vaccine companies were involved from the very beginning.
Yeah.
They had already sequenced the vaccine back in January. And they were already manufacturing these things, you know, early on. And it was an attempt to test mRNA platform technology.
Then you go down this rabbit hole and start to think, how long has the government been dominating, corrupting, colluding with the science, the scientific process, through Fauci dominating the dollars and the development of vaccines, which are now explicit partnerships between actual government entities and pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, they don't hide it. Yeah,
And then you start asking questions about everything.
Yeah.
All of these vaccinations that we give infants, like, is that science or is that the collusion of government and business, and or just the coercion of the health industrial complex?
It's unbelievable. And there are a lot of people.
I don't know the answer, by the way.
I will tell you. I think it's funny you and I talking about this because we're both, I would say, very sweet and naive. You know, even though we try not to be.
Yeah.
It turns out we are.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a quick funny story about this. One day somebody sent me a receipt into my email box that said at the top from Pfizer, and it said, "Dear so-and-so, head of the FDA, good talking to you yesterday. Hope your family's well. Hope to get caught up at the summer home this summer. I've wired you $1.3 million. And I read that and I thought, damn it, if this isn't the smoking gun. Here we have a vaccine company paying off the regulator to approve the vaccine in exchange for just like hardcore payola. And I was about to go to Twitter and say, I can't believe we found the whole answer. But before I did, I decided to check it out with people I've learned, right? There's people a lot smarter than I am.
Yeah.
And I went to other people and I said, is this thing authentic? Because I thought it was fake. They said, well, yeah, it's called the filing fee. The filing fee? What?
It's an elegant name.
1.3 million. How much of these filing fees are paying the budget of FDA? And the person said, it's about half.
Yeah.
You mean half of the FDA is paid for by the pharmaceutical? Oh, sure. How am I going to prove this? Well, it's on their website. So you go to the website, and it says half the budget of the FDA is paid for by pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
This is open graft. Like maybe that's why it's so effective. They just admit it.
At Kibbe on Liberty, freedom is a lifestyle 24/7, something you live and breathe and wear every day. If that describes you, you need the very best Liberty swag in the market today, just like this shirt I happen to be wearing. Go to freethepeople.org/KOL and check out our exciting merch. You too can love Liberty and look cool.
Yeah, it's in the white oak. But by the way, shame on us as students of economics who absolutely understand regulatory capture. We understand public choice theory. We understand the political gamesmanship that goes on into extending patents on special things.
Yeah.
And we should have seen this inherent corruption in science and health.
Yeah.
And not until it was so radically weaponized, we're like, oh, I'm completely red-pilled on this now.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that it's the perfect realm to use to weaponize to destroy human liberty and human rights, because there was so much embedded trust of your doctor, of pharmaceuticals, of the FDA, and trust, on like even you and I, who are the most dark, cynical people. We said, oh, well, if the doctor says take the pill,
Science,
take it.
yeah.
Science, right? So, and it's why they were able to use it so effectively, because there was so much trust there, and there always has been.
I think of Terry's closer with him than I am, but and I won't name lots of names, but I think Penn Jillette is perfectly comfortable defending himself on this. I think, and he, in my mind, is gravely wrong on all of these questions. Yeah. But I think it comes from his sort of Renaissance man belief that science, we can out-science ourselves from all of our problems. I don't know.
And you're speaking to a kind of a profound thing that is bugging all of us, and I think one of our speakers today is you. Talked about the problem with libertarians and how the libertarians didn't really step up, when we needed them the most. But one of the reasons is that libertarians are, just not suspicious of government enough, actually, it turns out, I was having a conversation with one of the people, and there are many, who supported the pandemic response early on, who you'd think was the best libertarian you ever knew, and then suddenly, just one day, thought it was... His reasoning was, he said that Deborah Birx explained that SARS-CoV-2 is different from every other previous virus we've experienced in our lifetimes because it could spread asymptomatically. Yeah? And so that's what made it different, which is to say that you could walk around without symptoms, you're feeling fine, and you're still spreading it on to others, which is kind of a form of aggression. So under those conditions, then we needed to have a different response than we did in 2009, 2003, 68, 69, 57. So we believed it, right? And after that conversation, first of all, it's not true. The latency period of SARS-CoV-2 is no different from 1 or H1N1, which is to say, maybe you'll carry it a day or two or something like that without feeling symptoms, and maybe during that period you could pass it on, but it wasn't an unusual latency period for any coronavirus. There was nothing unusual about this. Even if it came from a lab, there was nothing particularly unusual about it, because even something from a lab has to obey the laws of nature too, which is one of the reasons we shouldn't have excess fears of lab leaks probably, but that's a different subject. What was interesting about that is the way this very smart person was listening to the blizzard of information where they're dropping leaflets all over the place, each one with a different message. And he just happened to pick up the leaflet that said, this is a silent spreader.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it different. And so, which reminded me of the lie about the weapons of mass destruction, right? So they finally figure out some way to drill into your brain and flip that little switch that makes you finally go, yeah, this time, for this weird reason, liberty doesn't really work, does it?
Yeah. And that's the other half of my theory, and I mentioned this today, and I got some pushback from one of our fellow ranters. I do think in some ways you can configure the fight as fear versus liberty. And
I think that's right.
And
yeah.
I can attribute to the values associated with liberty, courage, a willingness to figure out complex problems that you don't understand. But fear, I mean, you can point to the most horrific moments in human history that were driven by our fears of the other. And the ultimate fear, perhaps, particularly in a fat and happy world where we can expect Uber Eats to deliver food to our front door.
Oh,
That the fear of being afraid of this invisible thing.
Yeah.
I'm finally like, I know better, but I'm going to give up all my liberty.
Yeah.
And I'm going to trust. We're going to break the two rules that we understand. The first rule is centralization doesn't lead to knowledge. Knowledge comes from the bottom up and the process of people figuring stuff out.
Right.
But I thought we all agreed on one rule. Power corrupts. There's a guy that said that, and we're like, I think that's the libertarian mantra.
But during the pandemic, we forgot both rules. We didn't. But I try to understand what went wrong with our side, and then you have the other problem is that a lot of people that didn't speak out early on somehow got attached to their views. They got embedded in that, committed. What do you call that when you've got a confirmation bias or something? So
at some point, it becomes a religious faith.
Yeah.
Not to be questioned.
No, but as late as November 2020, the Cato Institute released a massive study paper called What to Do During Pandemics, in which they celebrated tax-funded pharmaceuticals, masking, social distancing, the works. I mean, and this was the Cato Institute in November. So I wrote an article doing a very detailed critique of that paper because I think we need to come to terms with the fallacies and the failures here.
So let's end with some happy things because we could go down this sad rabbit hole. Two things I want to close out with, and you and Brownstone have had a big presence here this year.
Yeah. So what I've always found at PorcFest is a real genuine authenticity, by which I mean not the think tank elite, but people with normal jobs and trying to live out their liberty. And I hope we understand this after 2020. We understand that libertarianism is not just a parlor game we play because we enjoy it. It really is about real life, and it's about human flourishing, human thriving, and at these times civilization is truly at stake, and the times are long over for treating our body of work as a pure abstraction that we just play with. It's serious, and we have a huge role here. Now, I started Brownstone to use this COVID experience as a lens through which to understand every realm of human rights and human liberty. I think, partially what I have going on in my own mind is a little bit of, I would say, penance, because I was kind of like the worst of the techno-utopians, that progress is built into the fabric of the technology in our times and blah, blah, blah. And it wasn't.
Yeah.
I was wrong, Matt. I was really wrong. So I want to make up for that and recognize that we are on the precipice, that liberty is something you have to fight for. The human rights are not obvious, apparently. Look what they did. Look what they did to us. They divided the human population repeatedly. Infected, uninfected, masked, unmasked, vaccinated, unvaccinated. But this is the government set out to destroy the social order. And it's our job, and it's going to consume the rest of our lives to fix this problem and to inspire as best we can a revival of the old liberalism, that Hayek believed in.
You mentioned sometime this week. I love the description of Brownstone as a platform for intellectual dissidence.
Yeah.
And it brings us full circle to how we started this conversation. We will never, ever trust the New York Times again. Probably stopped trusting it a long time ago. But we have to build alternative institutions, places that you can at least trust that even if somebody's wrong when they speak, that they're speaking what they believe to be true.
Yeah.
And that we're allowed to question them.
That's
and
right.
engage in that process that
some
is
sincerity
real science.
and integrity. And you and I are both very much inspired by our intellectual mentors like Hayek and Mises, but both of them had to be rescued actually out of their homes and their natural environment in Vienna during the Great Diaspora. And it was thanks to London in the case of Hayek, or thanks to Geneva in the case of Mises. But I always thought that was then. We don't need that anymore. It turns out we need that more than ever.
Yeah. To be continued.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Pleasure.
Thanks for watching. If you liked the conversation, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and also ring the bell for notifications. And if you want to know more about Free the People, go to freethepeople.org.